Hello, I'm Roger Baker, Director of the Stratfor Center for Applied Geopolitics at RANE. This podcast is brought to you by RANE Worldview, the premier digital publication for objective geopolitical intelligence and analysis. Subscribe today at raneworldview.com.
This is the Essential Geopolitics podcast from RANE. I'm Emily Donahue. It's great to have you along. On today's podcast, we're discussing Sri Lanka. The country is in the middle of political, economic, and social turmoil. Why? Well, here with answers is Ekta Raghuwanshi, RANE's South Asia analyst. Ekta, it's always great to hear from you on the podcast.
Hi, Emily. How are you today?
Great. Can you tell me what's going on? What led to the current economic situation in Sri Lanka?
Sure, I would love to. So, as in the case of Sri Lanka, the crisis did not only start now because of the Russian war or even the COVID pandemic. It started well before in 2019 when first the tourism was hit after a terrorist attack happened in the country. After that, a series of missteps by the government were made. One, there were tax rates that were cut, which led to a very, very decreased government revenue generation. And then in April 2021, the president decided he wants only organic farming in the country. So he banned chemical fertilizers, which led to a huge shortfall or just a lowering in the productivity in Sri Lanka. So there were these number of reasons. Tourism was, on the other hand, affected because of COVID, and all the other reasons because of supply chain disruptions and other things like that. So everything just combined together, and now we see Sri Lanka in a huge economic crisis wherein it has no foreign reserves in its own coffers, and it is a heavily import dependent country. So we see people out on the streets because there is a huge shortage of everything, of food, of fuel, of cooking gas. Even there are power outages in the country. So nothing is going right for the current administration.
Ekta, I want to ask you how long this could continue. I mean, what are we looking at over the next several months?
Yes, unfortunately for Sri Lanka, I do not see the economic crisis easing. I think a very good timeline could be 8 to 12 months. There is some hope that if the government is able to get an IMF loan, do all the right things from an economic policy perspectives, like austerity measures in the coming budget and all the right things like that, then maybe we are looking at the end of 2023, and then we can see a stabilization coming in the Sri Lankan economic situation. However, yes, next few months are going to be even rough for the people, for the country, as we do not see any easing in supply chain disruptions. We do not see the prices of commodities like fuel or food prices going down because the Russian war in Ukraine is likely to continue in the next months. So it definitely depends on the external factors. However, there is a lot of economic correction that needs to be done from the government's perspective in the domestic scenario itself. So I think this is a long drawn battle for Sri Lanka.
So let's talk about Sri Lanka's neighbours. The role, for instance, of India and China in the current economic and political crises.
Yeah, sure. So, interestingly, Sri Lanka, because of its geographic position in the Indian Ocean, which we have talked about before, is a very strategically important country for both India and China, which are two major regional players. And we have seen Sri Lanka being this place of competition where both India and China have been trying to gain economic, strategic, or even political influence from time and again. What this crisis has done is, of course, we know Sri Lanka is heavily involved and invested in, China is heavily invested in Sri Lanka. There are a number of economic infrastructure projects that China has funded over the past decade or so. But what we're seeing a change here is, I think that's important to note, is India as a bilateral partner has really stepped up its role, just helping the country, helping Sri Lanka in this crisis. And we see that there was a rift. If you talk about India Sri Lanka relations like 6 months or even a year before this, there was a sort of rift in the relations. We were talking about Sri Lanka moving more towards China and India losing its influence and everything like that. But with the economic crisis, what has happened is India was able to be this supporter, being a major economy in the region. India is currently supplying a credit line for fuel to Sri Lanka from the past 1 or 2 months, I think. India will also is in negotiation of supplying another credit line for 2-3 months, which is very, very useful, essential for the people of Sri Lanka who otherwise will get no fuel because there are no other sources. India is also in talks with Sri Lanka to give them fertilizer for the next cultivation season, which could help in the food insecurity situation in the country too. So we will always see Sri Lanka as being this place for competition for these two major players. But what this crisis will do is it will help India gain its foot again in Sri Lanka and going forward from there, so it can be more influential in what happens in its own neighborhood.
Wow, Ekta, that's a lot to consider. Anything else that we should let people know about?
In terms of Sri Lanka, I think, as I said, next few months are very, very critical to watch. We always talk about the economic crisis, but there's also a political crisis brewing in the country. People want the current president, who they think is authoritarian, to go. We've seen mass protest for the past more than 50 days now in the capital city. I think the evolution of the political crisis in the country is also very, very related to the economic crisis. One note I'd like to mention is what we're seeing now is the leaders, the government, the political parties in Sri Lanka have kept the political crisis at the back burner for the moment because they're dealing with the economic crisis. But once they have a hold of the situation, like they're able to get a deal with an IMF in the coming month or so, we could see the political crisis crop back up again, and we'll have even new conversations regarding Sri Lanka.
Ekta Raghuwanshi is a South Asia analyst with RANE. You can find her analysis of the region in RANE Worldview. Subscribe today and get 4 weeks for just $1. Sign up at raneworldview.com. That's RANE Worldview.com. I'm Emily Donahue. Thanks as always for listening.